everybody, and welcome to Back Issues. I am Sal, and these are my parents, Mom and Dad.
Mom and Dad.
And we are going to talk about Dark Knight Returns from Frank Miller. This was, okay, we wanted to talk about Dark Knight Returns. People have been asking us to do this book for a while. The trouble was you have to go under a rock to find somebody who hasn't read this book. Thankfully, I didn't need a rock. I just went home, and I picked up my folks.
I just went home.
Yeah, I just went home and asked my folks, hey, have you ever read this? And they're like, no.
No.
That's a different kind of Batman than
Yeah,
when I was
this is
a
very
kid.
different. Exactly. Yeah, this is from a group who I remember when I was starting into like nerd-centric things, like I was trying to find some kind of connection, and Mom was like, I think they made me read The Hobbit once in school, and I didn't like it. And that was literally the amount of nerd-centric influence that we got.
I thought he was going to be a doctor, but he turned out to be a nerd.
Well, Frank Miller is, okay, he's a mixed bag. In 1986, he was a big deal, and he still kind of is, but back then it was because of things that he wrote that people enjoyed. Nowadays, it's more he writes things that are insane, and I don't know if it's fame that got to him or whatever, but in any case, Miller sought to kind of revitalize the Batman franchise because it had become kind of mired in the pop culture at the time. The Batman Adam West series from 1966 had been in repeats.
Yeah, that I know.
And that's the one that pretty much everyone, especially in the 80s, was familiar with at that point. You know, comics hadn't really become mainstream at that point, and so people are kind of like, hey, I know Batman, he's that groovy cat who hangs out with the kid in the spandex. And that's kind of it. So, but Batman is, you know, he's a tortured mythic character who was defined by death. And it's kind of defined by its really, really grittiness. And this is kind of the beginning of comic books becoming gritty. Grim and gritty was the genre they kind of called it. It was actually a helpful influence for Tim Burton to make his movie in 1989.
Now, I've seen The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yes.
See, I'm
and he also
fairly
made
relevant up to about the 90s.
Right. Well, he made a Batman movie right before the 90s that was like dark and gritty, and it was thanks to Miller kind of making this book and reminding people like, hey, Batman's not a joke. And obviously, when you read this, you're like, whoa, this is not really for children. Which was another kind of change for the Batman character.
Apropos that, what would you say is the timeline, the age line for a Batman?
You mean like how old is he?
How old should the kid be when he starts to read Batman?
Well, it's funny you should ask that because, like, depending on the Batman stories, I mean, you could be 6 and read the older stuff, like the stuff from the 40s and 50s. But kids were reading Batman in the 1960s. People like Neil Adams were working on books where Batman was a sex symbol and he, you know, fought monsters and really horrifying things. But children were reading it because there was no real, you know, guideline besides the Comics Code Authority, which was like a group of parents and teachers that were like, that read every comic and then said, this is acceptable for children or this is not acceptable for children.
Is it possible that it was acceptable for children because there was no basis in reality? That what we saw, we really saw as children.
It was fantasy? You
yes,
mean like it was
exactly.
ridiculous?
Exactly.
I mean, like, I don't... the examples that I gave, the Neil Adams stuff, his style was very realistic. And the things that he got caught up in were also incredibly realistic. Like, they might have been... You know, he might have fought Man-Bat, you know, a man who turns into a bat. But he also was dealing with love or loss or, you know, his ward going off to college or psychological horror. You know, there was some real heavy shit in there. So I don't know about that. I mean, maybe back when it first started, like from the 30s, but even then that was more like The Shadow, which, you know, is The Shadow appropriate for children? I mean, it's a man who stalks the night and shoots people. Like, I don't know if is that appropriate for kids? I mean, I would say yes. This is a book that I got when I was 13 years old. And
did I buy it?
I believe I bought it because I don't think you would have.
Probably not.
My comic book retailer was like, this is going to change your life. If you like Batman, how old are you now? 13? Well, then you are ready for this, which is, you know, hilarious that a comic book retailer was like, I'll influence your...
Was this the comic book store across the street from the barber?
Yeah. Yeah, this was Pegasus.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, let's get into the story a little bit about what this book entails. The story takes place in the future, and it's outside of continuity. What that means is all the stories that you've been reading about Batman from like 1939 all the way up to 1980, whatever, have been kind of taking place in one linear story. And it gets kind of dicey when in the 40s when he goes into space and he fights aliens, but for the most part, all the things that happened to Batman kind of happened one after the other in one kind of long standing timeline. This is a story where Frank Miller's like, forget all that. I want to tell a story about Batman when he's old. And DC isn't going to let you tell a story about Batman when he's old, so let's do this out-of-continuity story where Batman is in his late 60s.
Oh, that's old.
And he is retired. Yeah, it's funny that because like I remember assuming he was in his 80s or 70s, but no, he's 65 or so. And he's retired because one of his Robins died. The idea being, I guess, Robin got killed through some means that is unclear and isn't explained in the book. And so Batman says, I'm never going to do this again, and he quits. And it's kind of, it marks the end of the superhero regime. Like, Superman goes into hiding and becomes a stooge for the government. He actually literally becomes Reagan's lapdog. Reagan is featured prominently in this book, and he's the president, and the United States is kind of portrayed as a little more of a totalitarian state, obviously from whichever political position you lean towards.
Oh, I could relate to that.
Exactly. But Reagan uses Superman kind of under wraps. Like, Superman, because he's faster than a speeding bullet, because he's more powerful than a locomotive, he can fight the Soviets without being Superman, without showing his big red cape and his, the big S and everything.
So there's a possibility that Superman was involved with Iran-Contra.
Oh, no doubt. No, I have a feeling if he was, it wouldn't have gone down the way it did.
Okay.
Although there is a story in the 80s where Batman references the Iran-Contra affair.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There's a book where Robin actually does die, which takes place a couple of years after this, Batman literally battles with the Ayatollah Khomeini. Joker becomes the Iranian ambassador to the UN and then tries to gas the UN.
You may have hit on something here.
I mean, that's a thing that happened that no one wants to refer to again. So Batman's retired, he's done, and he's old, and he's trying. Basically, his whole motivation is he's looking for a good death. Because Batman is defined by death, and he's old, and he has no purpose, and so now he's looking for a good way to die. And he's racing cars. He's trying to catch that old Batman flair without being Batman, and it's eluding him. His good death is eluding him, and he's chatting with Commissioner Gordon, who he's revealed to him, after retirement. Guess what? I was Batman. Commissioner Gordon, I assume.
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Gordon's in this. He's also old. It's basically these two old war horses who are like, boy, the good old days, back when you used to put on a costume and beat the hell out of people. Remember that? Those were good times. As a result, the absence of Batman has created a power vacuum in Gotham, and Gotham City has fallen further into kind of the nightmare vision that conservatives in the 80s kind of assumed that New York was.
Before Giuliani.
Exactly. And
my politics are showing.
Yeah, and you see this based on the Mutant Gang, and the Mutant Gang is just a bunch of teenagers who shave their heads and wear these ridiculous outfits that are very centered in the 80s, and they hurt people. It's just a roving band of ne'er-do-wells, and they have their own ridiculous language, which I think is hilarious. Apparently, Miller wanted to kind of tap into the zeitgeist a little bit and play linguist and be like, okay, kids today in the 80s, if it was a darker future where there was no real boundaries, they might change their language a little bit, and so they have different expressions of, intent. But the mutants are kind of taking over.
Is Frank still alive?
Oh, yeah. Barely.
So, has he ever talked about his
influences? I'm sure he's done interviews. I mean, he's not shy from publicity or interviews or doing sequels to this. He's done now 2 sequels to this story, which kind of sucks because it works so perfectly on its own. It's a great self-contained story.
Yeah.
And then he's like, let's go back to the well and bring it back and try and recapture it. And it never quite gets there again. So the Mutant Gang's taken over Gotham and everything kind of sucks. And, Bruce is up in his tower. He's living not in a tower, but he's living in Wayne Manor. And he's all by himself, and he's 65, and he's just old. And Alfred is probably 90, and Alfred's still serving him, and Batman's just sitting there, and he's drinking again. The idea being that when Batman was Bruce Wayne, when he was young, he didn't actually drink alcohol. He drank club soda, or he drank ginger ale, and pretended that it was alcohol, so that he wouldn't be encumbered when he became Batman. now that he's retired, he drinks a lot. And in fact, there's two characters. I think Gordon and Alfred both reference his drinking, excessive drinking, and say, and Batman's drinking in his easy chair in his TV room, and he's just channel surfing, and he comes upon a rebroadcasting of the movie The Mark of Zorro, which in the history of Batman is the film that young Bruce Wayne, 8-year-old Bruce Wayne, took his parents to see. And then after they saw the movie, they went down Crime Alley, and then this, unknown or known gunman, Joe Chill, kills his parents in front of him and then leads him on the road to become Batman. Wayne is watching Mark of Zorro on TV, and it's starting to affect him, so then he changes the channel. And the television features prominently in this book. It's a great narrative device that echoes a lot of the themes and a lot of the intent behind what's happening in the story. So when he's changing the channels, each channel that he comes upon is a news station, which I think is interesting and kind of precognitive, because it's all news all the time, which in the 80s wasn't really that much of the case.
Before CNN even.
Exactly. So he's changing the channels, and each news station he comes upon is reporting another horrible news story about what's happening in Gotham. And the last story he comes on is finally just the weather, and it says, finally the heat's going to break, but we're in for a whopper of a storm. And then he turns off the TV, and he barges out of his room, out onto the balcony, and the rain pours on him, and it's this amazing scene where he's just being doused, and it's more like he's being baptized in the rains, in the torrent.
Storm, yeah.
And throughout the story, there are two narrative devices that Miller uses to punctuate what's happening. One, he has an internal monologue. He's very noir-centric. He likes to tell stories about hardened, badasses who, live in the gritty, darkened streets of real life. And so, as such, they all narrate their lives. They're all like, it was a dark day, and, the dame walked through my door, that kind of narration.
A dark and stormy night.
Yeah. And, but for Batman, when Bruce Wayne is kind of trying to remain in retirement, his narration is that there is another voice in his head of Batman, and Batman is urging him to let him come out again. It's this darker part of his soul that's like, you can't retain me, not with promises or vows or alcohol. I'm still there. You could say all you want, but I'm within you, and I could come out at any moment. And so it's like a darker, obviously it's a darker version of Batman. We don't really portray Batman as having multiple personalities or, being this kind of consumed or obsessed with death. But, here we are. And, a lot of Batman's origins are punctuated throughout the story. The idea being, when Batman finally decides to become Batman, Bruce Wayne's in his father's study. He's, in the earlier versions, he's lamenting the fact that he can't quite figure out how to capture the image he wants to inspire fear into the hearts of criminals. And then a bat flies through the window, and he says, there it is, it's an omen, I shall become a bat. Miller actually would write the origin of Batman again. In that one, he tries to effect change and gets stabbed for it, and then he's in his father's easy chair, and he says, if I can't figure out how to make this work, I have to let myself die. And then a bat crashes through the window. And it's just a little more dramatic. Mm-hmm. And then once he's doused in the rain, he comes back into his father's study, and then a bat crashes through the window again. And it's that moment that we are treated to kind of like a montage of Batman just beating the hell out of people.
Okay.
Finally, the next image you see of Batman is this larger version of Batman, and that's one of the most powerful images that people weren't really expecting, is this hulking, muscle-bound figure, because Batman for the most part has been lean and attractive, and right. In this one he's just larger and older and scarier. And it allows Miller to kind of accentuate these physical attributes that he likes to play with, like chiseled jaws. He can almost legitimately have a square jaw. The story kind of goes in 3 different chapters. The first one is Batman returning, the second one is Batman succeeding, and then the next one is Batman being hunted. Because when Batman returns, and not to be confused with that awful sequel that had the penguins and When Batman finally does return, or when the Dark Knight returns, it's pretty much unwelcome by everyone in authority, because Batman represents the people kind of taking the law into their own hands.
With their failures.
Yeah,
probably.
exactly. He accentuates their failures, because if you are in charge and you are good at what you do, then there shouldn't be roving gangs of people,
right.
murdering and pillaging.
Right.
And of course, Batman's methods are violent and scary and un-PC. And so Miller's kind of tackling the whole PC culture a little bit and saying, like, hey, sometimes we need somebody who doesn't give a shit about the rules.
Now, these mutants, are they physically mutants?
They look like mutants, but they're just kids. Like, they're just kind of teenagers who shave their heads and affect the visage. But they are led by a mutant leader who does look like a monster. And he's probably just a guy, but he's crazy and files his teeth down into fangs and literally looks like a monster. Batman has to defeat him in order to, establish his dominance over the city. Like, the mutant leader, he'll go on TV and issue warnings and pithy threats to the leaders of Gotham. And of course, the mayor is a spineless coward. And at one point, Batman decides he's going to go take on the mutant leader, so he dusts off the Batmobile, which in this the original Batmobile, you've probably know from the show, is a really rad car with a blowtorch in the back. In this one, it's a tank. It's like an anti-riot tank filled with rubber bullets because Batman doesn't kill, and that's his whole vow, is he doesn't kill people. But he certainly will maim them and really, really hurt them, put them in a position to die. And Batman will take on the mutants, and he does. And then the mutant leader issues a challenge to him that says, you have to use your toys to beat me. Like, you're probably not strong enough to defeat me. And Batman's like, I have to show him that I'm tougher than he is.
Now does he have any special power?
The mutant leader? He's just really strong and young. And it's kind of like the future versus the past. Like, the old guard versus who is challenging it to be the new, inheritor of the Earth. So Batman fights the mutant leader and effectively gets his ass trounced. Like, he is beaten within an inch of his life.
Batman is beaten.
Yes. And earlier in the story, there's a moment between these two hippie parents who are too high to notice that their daughter is affected by Batman. The idea being that when Batman returns, the people of Gotham, not the authority, but most of the people of Gotham are happy about it and inspired to take the law into their own hands, or at least to take back their city. And one of them is a 13-year-old girl named Carrie Kelly, who would eventually become Robin in this story.
Oh.
And that's a kind of a neat idea of, number one, having a girl Robin, which they eventually do 20 years later, and also it was an afterthought. Apparently Frank Miller wanted to just have another Robin, another kid shows up. And then one of his colleagues said, why don't you make it a girl? If you're gonna do a story that's not in the continuity, why don't you make it a girl, for God's sake? And he's like, all right, I don't care. So it's a girl now. And but Carrie buys herself a Robin costume and then goes out and tries to be like Batman. There's those card hustlers who are find the red card, and she puts a cherry bomb in his pants and then runs away. It's kid stuff, but it's her trying. It's what a 13-year-old would do if they think they're being Batman. Then she finds out that Batman is going to face the mutant leader at the dump, and so she follows him. And when Batman is about to die, she actually winds up rescuing him from the mutant leader. And then she puts Batman's broken body into the Batmobile, and then Alfred calls the self retrieval system on it, and it goes back to the Batcave. And in the Batcave, Batman kind of has a very similar moment to the one I described earlier when he was young and becoming Batman, when he failed for the first time and said I think I have to die if I can't figure it out. And he strips off his Batman costume, he goes into the darkest corner of the cave, and then a bat sucks in the air and hisses at him, and he's like, okay, I've been approved by my avatar. I guess I'll go do that. So he lets Alfred stitch him up because I guess Alfred has combat training, and
from World War I.
Yeah, and yeah. So the next story is just Batman kind of returning and issuing a new. He's like, okay. Like, I couldn't just beat him with brute strength. That was a stupid move. I was tackling it from the perspective of a young man, and I have to remember that I'm not. Like, I'm not a kid anymore. I have to be smart about this. So he he's like, okay, Carrie, you want to be Robin? First job, you gotta pretend to be a mutant and go into each sect of the gang.
Infiltrate the
gang
opposition.
And start a rumor that there's big goings on at this one location. And so she does, and she creates this kind of like chain reaction where all the mutants are kind of like, okay, like there's something happening they call it the pipe, because there's this huge pipe that leads into the dump. And so all the mutants wind up there, and the mutant leader, by the way, was arrested at the end of that fight. When Batman and the mutant leader beat the hell out of him, but they still wind up catching him. The mayor goes to meet with him to like negotiate, because the mayor's spineless and the leader shows strength and leadership and whatnot. And it's also just a way to show, like, look at these people in charge. Like, they're willing to negotiate with gang leaders.
Right.
Which of course I'm sure people would have an opinion of today anyway. But he is in jail, but it's kind of like, so the mayor goes to meet with him, and because it's going to be televised or it's going to be reported on, and his polls are really low, he doesn't want to be shown as weak. So he forgoes the armed guard and goes into the cell with the mutant leader alone, and the mutant leader tears his throat out with his mouth. So the mayor's killed, and the leaders, or the mutants, are even more galvanized than ever before. And so Batman's like, the only way to beat them, you couldn't hold all of these kids in jail. Mm-hmm. The only way to beat them is to defeat them, is to humiliate them. So, and by the way, because of the colossal failures that are going on with capturing Batman, because the higher-ups don't like him and don't want him there, and they're like, hey, Gordon, you gotta go catch Batman. Gordon's like, nah, I'm not gonna go do that. Because of Gordon's colossal failures, according to the establishment, Gordon is being retired. And he's being replaced by a woman named Ellen Yindel. But the last, kind of rule-bending that Gordon can give for Batman is he releases the mutant leader from his cell, and Batman lures the mutant leader through an escape route that Batman has created for him. And the escape route leads directly to the pipe. Where Batman uses tactics and intelligence in his fighting to defeat the mutant leader. He still beats him, but he fights him intelligently. And he leads him into a mud hole, so his movements are limited, so he's a little slower. And Batman's like, I fought in every single version of terrain. I know how to fight in mud, but you don't. So now I'm bringing you down. I'm almost, in effect, aging you to my level. So Batman basically defeats him and beats the hell out of him, and the mutants are astounded and so enthralled with Batman that they then become the Sons of Batman. And paint bats on their faces, and now are a new gang where they kill and pillage against criminals in the name of Batman. It's exactly as bad, only now it's in Batman's name, and they're maybe doing a little and it's not random acts of violence anymore. So
they're organized.
They're organized now, and Batman, by the way, isn't in charge of them. That'll come later, but for the most part, Batman is divorced of their involvement. He's just like, listen, if they want to dress like me and go kill people, I got nothing to do with that. I defeated them. I'm moving on now. A couple of plot points that are kind of ever-present throughout the story. One of them is, when Batman retired, so did the Joker.
The Joker.
Yeah, and you're familiar with the Joker, but in this...
Jack.
Yeah. In this, the Joker kind of exists because of Batman, and only does crime to get Batman's attention. So when Batman retired, the Joker's like, well, I have no point in doing anything. So he stops smiling and he just commits to Arkham. And there's this pop psychologist who is trying to make a name for himself, and he takes on the Joker case, and he's like parading Joker around, and he wrote a book called I'm Sane and So Are You. Just a big joke on the whole, like Dr. Ruth kind of idea. But when Batman is first reported to have returned, the Joker smiles again, And there's actually, the line is Batman darling, and you're like, oh, is Joker kind of in love with Batman? There's this little, like, there's this undercurrent. By the way, that's the only thing. People read this book and they're like, oh, Joker's clearly in love with Batman. And the whole relationship is just that Joker wants to be with him.
Yeah.
I think that's a little reaching. I think in this, it's just Joker he needs Batman, and he feels this deep connection with him.
Yeah, it gives him a reason.
To be a crazy asshole. So Joker is hatching a scheme that you kind of don't get to see until like the midpoint of the book. Also, this is when Superman finally shows up. The president, who is not named but is obviously Ronald Reagan, tells Superman to go visit Batman. He's like, I know you know who he is, so go talk to him and see if you can make him stop, because I'm getting too many phone calls about this. And Superman's basically like, listen, like, your methods are extreme, and you're scaring people, and you got to knock it off. And Batman's like, well, I'm not going to. So now what? And Superman says, well, if it comes to this, someone with authority is going to make me have to take you down. And Batman says, when that happens, may the best man win. And you're like, oh shit. Writing's on the wall for a Batman-Superman fight. So the psychologist is going to, because Joker hasn't done anything bad in the last like couple of weeks, actually hasn't done anything for years, for like 10 years, Joker hasn't done anything. The psychologist is going to bring the Joker onto David Letterman's show. They call him David Endocrine. I don't know why, but it's drawn as David Letterman. Right. So they're going to bring him on Letterman, and this is when Joker is going to enact his evil scheme, and so he does. And
on the Letterman
the Letterman show. So what happens is Joker's on the show, and he basically just is unapologetically, candid, and he's like, I'm going to kill everyone in the room, and everyone's like, okay, haha, whoa. And then, and all these cops are there because they're like, you can't bring the Joker out in front of people. Like, even the police force, who is kind of against Batman, knows that the Joker's going to do something
bad.
So there's thousands of cops there, and I think they also are expecting Batman to show up, which indeed he does. And so Batman has to battle all of the Gotham City Police Department to get to the Joker. But it's too little too late, and the Joker, through ridiculously confusing means, in the book there are these sentient robot dolls that the Joker has this other character build for him, and they release poison into the room, and then Joker rides one of them out of the building. This is the image. It's confusing as hell. I don't know why, like, there's robot dolls and why they can think and speak for themselves, but they're here, and it's just... This is one of the things. Frank Miller can do incredible, contemporary, like, insightful stuff. He can really, like, tug at your heartstrings or really, like, infect the culture with this amazing, powerful imagery. And they can also throw this weird shit at you where you're like, whoa, but why did you do that? And I guess it's his way of being... I want to throw out the idea that he's doing this as a way of saying, don't worship me, because I also do this crazy stuff.
Right.
But in any case, Joker does manage to kill everyone in the room, including the Doctor and David Letterman. and Batman basically says, like, okay, like, this is it, I gotta go kill the Joker. I gotta break my rule.
Mission, yeah.
It's my mission to beat. I gotta beat him, because there's no stopping him. And Joker has like one scheme after another, which he enacts like within like an hour of each other. He poisons cotton candy and goes to the county fair and gives it to children. And this is when Batman's like, okay, that's it. And there's that line, and it's funny because there's always great lines, but they're all spoken within a Batman's head, in which Batman says, I always knew there was nothing wrong with you that I couldn't fix with my hands. You're like, oh, yeah, but like just amazing lines that you're like, holy shit! Like, and of course, Carrie Kelly, the young girl, is now Robin, and he's bringing her along because Batman is not anything without bringing young children into into danger. And Batman just goes to town on the Joker, and he throws a batarang into his eye. There's a lot of really visceral adult imagery in this book, and it's kind of interesting because most people had been used to Batman being kind of like, okay, chum, let's go climb the building and run into, Jamie Farr. And this is kind of the first time you're seeing Batman for real, or at least in a way that you're like, this is kind of what Batman would be like if you actually encountered him.
Well, if you had to kill all these evil,
well, if you had to deal with them, and it's still beholden to Batman's code. Like, Batman does say, like, I'm not going to kill anybody, but when he sees that the Joker is this unstoppable machine that exists because he's there, he's like, I have to kill this one guy. So Batman chases the Joker into the Tunnel of Love, which is, of course, another.
That's
Jesus.
We like that one.
And Batman tries to stop him, and as he grabs the Joker's head, and as he's trying to snap his neck, Joker just is stabbing him like nonstop. And finally, Batman cracks the Joker's neck, paralyzing him, but not killing him. And the Joker, and so the two of them, they're both like these old men, exhausted, just slump into the Tunnel of Love, and they're just like, and Batman's just trying to catch his breath, and the Joker's just taunting him, saying things like, people saw what you did, and they're going to think that you killed me, but you didn't have the nerve. And then the Joker just cracks his own neck and kills himself. With the strength of a devil he twists, is the line. And it's an incredible image, and I remember seeing it when I was like 11 or 12, and not just seeing the images because they were in like Batman books, like in collected books, and I was like, what is that? Because out of context, you're like, why is everyone old, and how's the Joker dying? And
I had no idea you had these influences.
Oh no, of course.
At that age.
That's the thing, is that for comic book fans, comics were kind of people always assumed that they were for children, and that they're
like the old series that we used to read, not Sluggo. I'm thinking of
Sluggo's a comic.
Sluggo and
and
all of that.
Popeye.
Yeah, Popeye. Yes,
Popeye. Yeah,
yeah. Popeye would be a little different. Frank Miller's Popeye, where he legitimately.
I should think so.
He doesn't take he takes steroids and he just beats people. Like
now, what about Robin? Robin was
Robin's in this, and
she just pops in and out.
Well, no, she is his like support. Like she takes care of the rest. Batman solves the direct problem.
She
cleans house by dealing with the peripherals. Joker has an assistant, this huge fat monster guy who built those weird robot kids, and he winds up chasing her onto a roller coaster at the fair while Batman's battling the Joker. And he's about to get the upper hand, and she kind of like moves in such a way that he slips and he dies. And it's in a really graphic way. Like, he flips over and he like hits his head on the track, and then like the cart comes by and it like pops his head. And this is her moment where she sees death for the first time, and she just starts crying. Because she's a 13-year-old girl in a Robin costume fighting monsters. Like, it's just this really, really real image where she's just like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing now. It kind of calls into question everything she's doing, but at the heart of it, all that matters is the mission, Batman's mission. So she hardens herself back up, bottles it in, and then goes back to work. She then, when Batman finally escapes the Tunnel of Love, because the cops descend on the fair, he rigs the Joker body with like with like a sensor, so that once somebody touches it, it catches on fire, which will distract them so that he can escape. But there's so many cops, and it's overwhelming, and Robin winds up pulling the Batcopter in and rescuing Batman into the middle of the fight. And she winds up like blowing up a few cop cars to distract them, and then grabs Batman and then takes him away. Throughout the whole story, there's the undercurrent of the Cold War, and the Soviets are invading a small island nation, which they call Corto Maltese, but is an allegory for Cuba, I guess. And and Superman has been kind of beating the Soviets all by himself on behalf of the U.S. government. And when Superman fights back the Soviet forces and effectively quashes their invasion, the Soviets launch a nuke at the U.S. And Superman pushes the nuke into an unpopulated area, but it goes off. And when the nuke goes off, it sets off an EMP that decimates the power in Gotham. An EMP is an electromagnetic pulse. It's the idea that when a nuke goes off, it would short out every electrical system in the area. Mm-hmm. So the EMP goes off, it knocks out all the electrical systems in Gotham, which frees the mutants who were arrested.
Oh, dear.
Planes which were flying overhead are crashing into the city, causing massive city fires. So Gotham is, in effect, burning to the ground, and Superman has just suffered a nuclear explosion, and he actually draws power from the Earth itself to reconstitute himself. But Batman, because of the EMP and everything's kind of shut off, and Batman needs to get to Gotham City from Wayne Manor immediately. So he and Robin go to the stables, and they pick up their horses, which of course Batman has because it's Bruce Wayne, he's a rich guy, and rich people have horses. But it's basically so that we could have these really amazing images of Batman riding a horse and riding into town to rescue a la Zorro or whatever.
Oh, Zorro. I was thinking John Wayne. So where's the conflict between Batman and Superman?
Well, Batman saves the city, in effect. He goes to the junkyard where the Sons of Batman are rallying, and the Sons of Batman are like, okay, now we're going to raise Gotham and build our own. And Batman's like, no, you're going to follow me. Your weapons, your guns are the weapons of the enemy. We don't use them. And tonight you're going to follow me. And Batman rides, and he gives a couple of horses to a couple of the key Sons of Batman figures. They ride in. The city, by the way, is being torn apart by its own citizens. People are going crazy, looking for food or weapons or water, and whatever they can find. And there's actually a sweet moment where Gordon is also trying to he was out getting groceries for his wife, and this whole thing happened, and he's trying to get home to his wife, but each time he's almost there, he has to stop and save someone or help someone, and there's these fires, and he's trying to put them out, and then Batman, on horseback with the Sons of Batman, ride in, and they actually wind up stopping the mutant gang, and he says, "I'm here to appeal to your community spirit. I'm sure you're all eager to help." And it's just the image of Batman, this imposing figure that people look up to and aspire to be, that inspires the entire city to come together. And then this paint shop owner dumps all the paint onto the pavement and uses them as buckets to create a chain of water to put out the fires. And there's a moment where, because the new commissioner had issued a warrant for Batman. She didn't like Batman. She's like, this guy, no, we're not, I'm a police officer.
Right, we don't like vigilantes.
When she meets with Gordon for the last time, Gordon tells her a story about FDR's fireside chats, and how he said a couple of years later, a lot of people with a lot of know-how said that when we got bombed by Pearl Harbor, that FDR might have known it happened. And he's like, that really bounced around in my head for a couple of years until I realized that it wasn't for me to judge, because it was too big. He was too big. Because when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, we as a country were so afraid. We didn't know what to do. And then his voice came on the radio and told us not to be afraid. And we did. He's like, in a day we had an army. And she's like, I don't see what this has to do with Batman. And he says, maybe one day you will. And so when Batman is leading the mutants and the Sons of Batman to put out the fires, there's snipers ready to go and to kill Batman. Right. And Commissioner Yindel's right-hand guy is like, okay, we've got the shot. And she goes, no, he's too big. And at that moment, you're like, okay, she's on board. Or at least she understands. Maybe she's not going to help him, but she's not going to hurt him or stop him. So after the country, by the way, was knocked out, everybody was, the entire U.S. is screwed up because of the EMP. Which is a legitimate thing.
Concern that we still have.
Yeah. The only city that has order is Gotham. And only because of Batman. So Reagan sees it as an embarrassment and sends Superman to stop him. So then Superman goes, and Superman doesn't want to fight him. He's like, I'm not here to kill...
Yeah, it's one superhero to another.
Yeah, after they get order, Superman asks Batman to name the place, because it's all going to be televised, and it has to be a big public spectacle. So Batman says Crime Alley, where my parents died. I want you to fight me. So Batman winds up calling up an old friend, Green Arrow, who's another superhero, who wouldn't retire when all the other superheroes did. So Reagan sent Superman to stop him. And all he had to do to stop him, because Green Arrow just shoots arrows, is rip off one of his arms. So he's armless. But Batman enlists him by giving him a kryptonite arrow. And he's like, you have... Like, everyone has a job in this grand Superman fight that I'm orchestrating. Mm-hmm. Like, Superman thinks he's in charge, but I'm actually running the show here. So everyone has a role, and no one knows the other person's part. And Batman takes this odd pill and then goes to fight Superman. And he's wearing this, like, new suit that's, like, kind of like a strength augmenter. And it's a fair fight, because Superman's, he can push the moon out of orbit, so if he can't be beaten by Batman. But because of the nuclear explosion, it really took a lot out of Superman, so his strength is a little bit lowered. Mm-hmm. So you can make it a little more believable that that Superman and Batman could fight each other. But also, Batman's wearing the suit, and he's also... Superman's unwilling to fight him at first. Because Superman's like, we're friends. Like, I want you to just stop. So the two of them battle. Superman reluctantly, and Batman with everything he has. He taps into the city's power grid and like fries him, and he's throwing napalm in his face. He's doing he's pulling out all the stops. And when Superman finally gets annoyed, he just kind of like bats him away and cracks 3 ribs, and he's just like, Bruce, you have to stop. They're good. Do you want me to kill you? Is that what you want me to do here? And that's when Batman signals to Green Arrow, like, fire. So Green Arrow, and because he only has one arm, he pulls the arrow with his teeth. That's how strong and badass he is. This is Frank Miller. Every man in this book is a man's man or a Nancy boy. There's no in between. So he pulls the arrow with his teeth and fires the kryptonite arrow, which Superman obviously catches, but then it explodes and becomes this like kryptonite napalm that creates a cloud of dust that completely depowers Superman. And then Batman just beats him. And that's where we have this line. It's actually earlier where we have a line where he says, "It's way past time you learn what it means to be a man." Which has always stuck with me.
Not to Superman.
Yeah, not to be you're an alien from another planet who pretended to be one of us, and I'm actually a person. Mm-hmm. Like, that's kind of the idea here. But Batman says, like, I want you to remember this, Clark. In all the years to come, in your most private moments, I want you to remember the one man who beat you. And then Batman's heart stops, and he dies. And Superman is like, everyone get away, like, because the cops descend, and he's like, don't touch him. Because even through it out, like, Superman is a man of integrity who cares about this friend of his. And then they have this big funeral where it's revealed that Bruce Wayne was Batman. Everyone saw it on TV and everything. And the Wayne Manor was actually destroyed. He set up like a self-destruct thing, or he had Alfred do it. Mm-hmm. And then so Alfred goes outside and he watches Wayne Manor just reduced to rubble, and then he has a stroke and dies. And before he dies, he says, "Of course, how utterly proper," and then dies because he's the servant of the house. Now there's no house, there's no need for a servant. So everyone's kind of like, okay, well, nobody knows what happened to his money, or Bruce Wayne had no family, so I guess that's it. So then they have this funeral. And Clark Kent's there. Superman is like, he's got his glasses on. He's a big welt from the fight. And everybody leaves. And then there's this Bruce Wayne's distant cousin who is draped in, mourning clothes. She is the only one staying behind, and Clark is just so bereaved that he's also there. And then he looks at her, and he realizes it's actually Carrie Kelly Robin, and she has a shovel.
Oh.
And he looks at her, and then he gives her a wink. And then he leaves. And Batman says, like, okay, so... And the idea being that Batman took this pill to affect death, but didn't actually die. It stopped his heart, and then it reignited it later, and, so that Robin could dig him up later. But he needed to put on display his death so that people would leave him alone. And the idea
Frankenstein.
here... Yeah. And, well, he's still alive. It's not like he was reconstituted. It's more like... No, it's like in Romeo and Juliet when Juliet takes the pill from the apothecary to affect death but doesn't actually die. It's like that. So Batman basically says, like, Clark heard my heartbeat. He knows that I'm alive, but now he knows to stay out of my way. And I'll be working from the shadows to affect change. I won't do a big thing where I'm Batman anymore, but I will still get the same results. And this will be a good life, or at least good enough. And that's how the book ends. And you're like, okay.
More to come.
Well, the implication is and Batman will be out there. And, who knows what'll happen. Unfortunately, he then tells us what happens, and it's less interesting than what you could imagine would happen. But in any case, Dark Knight Returns is a story about, just Batman kind of coming back. And while it's a story in and of itself about, an old Batman returning, it's also, in effect, Batman returning to the cultural mindset. It's Batman returning to his roots. It's Batman returning to everything that made him a popular character and an icon, exactly. So, for that reason, a lot of people consider this to be a definitive Batman story. It's, for me, my favorite Batman story of all time.
Did you say you were 11 when you
I was 13.
13, sorry.
I was 13. No, and I left out a couple of details because, for brevity, we're trying to, it's already an hour, we might as well.
And what's its relevance
tomorrow? The relevance tomorrow, I think, is that I believe this is a timeless comic. I believe that this book, like Shakespeare, can be set at any time and still work. Just because it is directly cemented in the 80s with the Reagan character and the 80s imagery and iconography, it's still you could set it any time. You could set it today. You could set it in the 70s. You could set it in the 20s. It still works. The idea of a city in peril and its Avenger retired and then returning to battle a greater evil. I mean, that in and of itself is a story that we can all kind of get behind.
Right.
Sure, great theme.
Well, it's a theme that, goes back before Shakespeare.
Exactly. Beowulf is a story about, I mean, it's not really, it's about a great warrior who's old, who's, fighting one last time. It's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don Quixote again.
Don Quixote, exactly. Tilting windmills. Batman can never really, ultimately win. You can't beat crime. But you can beat up people who commit them, and I guess that's almost
have somewhat of an impact.
Yeah.
Would you say the last part was unnecessary?
The Superman fight?
Yes.
I mean, it certainly is. Okay, for a lot of people, it's their favorite part. For a lot of people, it's the fight they always wanted to see. Because when would Batman and Superman actually fight?
Yeah.
What would get them to fight?
Them to be against,
and it would be technically conflicting ideologies, I guess. But it does. It's very different from the rest of it, because the rest of it's all like a noir story, and Batman fights street level characters. He also fights Two-Face earlier because he's trying to save him and rescue him from himself, and then ultimately Two-Face is like, you can't, because that's who I am. So deep water we're treading in. I mean, it's.
Now let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
When you first read this at 13,
did I get any of this?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're 13 and you're reading this, it's an amazing Batman story because you've never read anything like this. Mm-hmm. It's Batman at his hardcorest. But did I get all the imagery and I got some of it because at 13, I was exposed to actual literature and we did actually read, and I was especially at 13 I was definitely more analytical and I was really looking into the deeper nature of things. Mm-hmm. But that's the best part of this book, is that I read it at 13, I didn't get everything. But then I read it at 17 and I got a lot more. And then I read it at 25 and I was like, oh, and I got even more. And then, as you get older, you read it and you
that's what they say about Moby Dick,
Is that true? Because
it's a novel that if you read it, you read it in high school or whatever, and then if you go back as somewhere in midlife and you read it, it has a whole other context.
It's true, yeah.
So. Or is it that you are bringing something to it?
Well, that's part of it.
Well, you are, because especially because that's a perfect analogy, because it's all about an old man who is obsessed with revenge, and you can't really understand Ahab until you have lived and regretted. And as a young man, how many regrets can you have?
Right.
But as an older man, you take what you take what you have to the literature you absorb. But that's true. You absolutely affect the narrative with your own experiences and thoughts. I can imagine people reading this and seeing it this could be used as to tout both leftist and right-wing ideals. You could say that Reagan is a fascist in this book, and that Superman is a lapdog. You could say that Batman's a fascist, and that he's the real problem. Mm-hmm. And both sides are kind of shown in equally ugly light.
Yeah.
So it's just a question of which one you would like to be more.
Right. Yeah. Your particular bent is.
Yeah, and as you get older, your bent might shift one way or the other, and you might get a new reading experience out of it. I know that I get a new reading experience out of it every few years. Like if I read it one after the like. When I looked over it today, I was like, "Yep, this is cool. I remember this." But it wasn't but this is transcendental right here. I was just like, "Okay," but who knows? Maybe in my 50s, I might be like, "Wow."
The way you described this,
right,
certainly puts it in a whole different context for
That's
me.
True.
Other than
you just reading it and being like, "Batman really punched that guy." Like,
well, I remember, for instance, what we would do way back when is. There weren't very many traffic lights, so you would get your hair cut at Carlos's.
Yes.
And then you would go across the street.
Yeah.
And I always thought at 9 or 10, it was, since we live in a town that has no traffic lights.
Right.
It was a great experience for you to cross the street.
Yes.
By yourself. And the object was to go to the comic book store.
Right, but your intent was to teach me how to fend for myself.
Well, sort of. Right. And I had no idea.
Oh, what was waiting for me on the other side of that road.
Right, exactly.
That's true.
I knew it was a safe place, and it was a nice guy, and, you kind of,
and he definitely, and I'll say, he definitely steered me more towards books that were my level,
Mm-hmm.
We need a new term. We really need a new term. Comic book.
Oh.
Does not cover the ground anymore.
Well, this is considered to be a graphic novel. That's the term that they use.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes it refers to a self-contained story that has a beginning, middle, and end, like this. That's a graphic novel. Others say that it's a collected volume of a story, of individual books. But no, this is considered to be a graphic novel.
That covers it nicely.
Yeah. And I like graphic novels because they have a beginning, middle, and end. They don't have the frustrating part of reading a monthly series is that there can never be an end. No one ever just goes home at the end and then lives happily ever after.
Right.
Or dies.
The end.
And there's no end, because otherwise it means they're not selling any more books, and that's bad news. That's bad for business. So, this was a cool idea, by the way. They were so afraid of publishing this book just normally that they invented a title for it, that they called it an Elseworlds story. So it's not the Batman that you're reading. It's that Batman over there. But if you like it, then we'll make it part of everything.
Make more of it.
If you like it, then we'll call it Dark Knight 3 Master Race, which is what's happening now. If you read the book by itself, it's an amazing piece of work, and you can draw as many conclusions as you can from it. When you start to develop an identity for the author and how it informs the work, then it starts to it's like Tolkien when he wrote Lord of the Rings. A lot of people are like, look at all your World War II allegories.
Right.
And he said, no, it's not an allegory for World War II. It's just stories about hobbits. And people are like, you don't even know that you did that, But if you learn more about Tolkien as a person, you see all of the influences that he has, of bits of his personality that were infused into the work.
Well, we're all created by the time, influenced by the times in which we live.
Oh, absolutely. But does that hurt the work? That's the question. Does it detract from it? I like the book because it's timeless. If I found out that Frank Miller, was beaten by a huge dude in an alley one time, 10 years before this book came out, it would hurt the book, because I'd be like, oh, I guess he's just working out some issues he has. But if this just came out of his brain, here you go, here's my Batman, you're like, holy shit, where did this come from? We all know it's not real, but the muse came and gave him something to write. I mean, similarly, like Alan Moore is another writer who wrote a story called Watchmen around the same time, and it turned the whole genre on its ear. We could talk about that one day in the future, maybe, but it's a little deeper and more involved.
Well, since I have no background at all in this,
that's the one thing I would recommend. If I would say hey, you guys should read a comic, I guess it'd be Watchmen. Yeah, because it's deeper and interesting, and there's no mistaking the intent. With this, you're like, boy, look at this wacko in a bat costume. Beat these people. How do people derive a meaningful experience from it?
This.
With Watchmen, you're like, okay, I see what you're doing, because it's a lot. It's much more. That is a perfect graphic novel, because there's a blend of literature and art and comic sensibilities.
And who wrote Watchmen?
That's Alan Moore.
Alan Moore.
An Englishman from Northampton. Yeah, I do a hilarious impression of him, but we won't do it here. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Back Issues, doing Dark Knight Returns
With Mom
and Dad.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, guys. This is fun.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is what happens, by the way, when you want me to do an iconic book that the guys have probably read already. It was this or Killing Joke, and I chose Dark Knight. We'll see if that was, that was the right move or not. But we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.